Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look at a specific bike in the world of the First Ride game. And this one, as with a couple of the bikes that we've already talked about, has a very special place for me. It's one of my favourite superbikes, actually. It's not one that I talk about a whole lot, but it's easily my favourite Kawasaki. I am a Kawasaki fan. I consider them to be, in a funny kind of way, the Lamborghini of bikes, almost, like the Lamborghini to Ducati's Ferrari. But the fact that they are loud, fast and green probably adds into that. But this bike in particular is easily my favourite that they've ever made, because for one thing, look at it. As far as I'm concerned, this is a stunning looking bike. I don't think any of the other Ninjas of any type, be it the 12R, the 6R, the 9R, even the other 10Rs, older or newer, I don't think any of them have even come close to how good looking and how pretty this bike is. Now, Kawasaki's, even in the real world, and this goes for a lot of Japanese brands, to be honest, they're very, very good value, because the pricing is far cheaper than something like an Italian bike, for instance, but the performance is fantastic, and this is a prime example of that, because this one in particular, the 2006 Ninja 10R, it's an 11 grand bike. That is so cheap, and to get similar kind of specs from something like a Ducati, you're easily going to pay probably 4 or 5 times the price, even in the game. Now, of course, there are other bikes that aren't that much more expensive, which can still come close, but it just goes to show the kind of value that you can get. Now, for 11 grand, as the name suggests, it's around a 1000. 998cc, it's a 4-cylinder. You're putting out good power and good torque, 175 horsepower, 85 pound-feet of torque, so it's pretty thumpy. You've got plenty of power and torque to work with, especially given that even though the bike is a little rounded, it's a little soft and perhaps a little heavy looking, at least it could be, in a similar way to the ZZR 1400, also known as the ZX-10R, which is a heavy bike. This one actually isn't. It only weighs 174 kilos, so it's got less weight than power, and as we all know, that's a real good place to be. Now, consequently, this is one of the only bikes that we've talked about so far to have the magic 1 horsepower per kilo. And the bikes that you would typically think of as having that tend to be more stuff like the Yamaha R1, which is a fantastic rival to this bike, and I used to be a massive fan of the Yamaha, but over the years I kind of went off it. This one though, which I found out about at a similar time, I've never gone off this one. I've always loved this Ninja, and as I already said, it's always been my favourite Kawasaki ever since I first saw it. But unlike some of my other favourites, which aren't necessarily among the best, for instance, that a brand has to offer, as an example, my favourite Ducati is the 748 SP. There are plenty of faster ones, but that was just my favourite. With this Kawasaki though, it takes quite a lot to beat this thing, because it's a good all-rounder. Even Kawasaki's that are more powerful, like the 14R or the 12R, or even a newer 10R, they're not necessarily going to wipe the floor with this, because even by today's standards, this is still a very, very capable bike, and once again, for the price, it's a difficult deal to beat. Now, the horsepower per tonne, which isn't completely applicable, of course, to a bike, is incidentally 1006. True supercar territory. In fact, often way beyond supercar territory. But of course, in a more accurate way to a bike, that's 1.006 horsepower per kilo. As I alluded to just now, the magic horsepower per kilo, in this case a little bit over that, so even better. Now, in terms of how the bike actually performs, it's a pleasure to work with. Now, it takes maybe a lap or so to get used to it, especially if, as I was, you've previously been driving, say, a 90s Ducati 998 and a Bimota Tessie before that. It's an entirely different kind of bike. It's bigger, it's more powerful, it's newer, it's heavier in some cases than some of the other bikes that I've been riding. But the only thing that you really have to get used to on this one is the braking. You need to brake a little bit earlier and in a more smooth manner than, say, you can in the Ducati or the Bimota, because they're far less powerful bikes and you can really throw them through the corners. One of the reasons why I love the 748 is for just that reason. With this one, you can't do that, and that goes pretty much for any bike of this kind of size and power. They're more designed to be kind of an all-rounder. That's the whole purpose of the 1000 range, and to some degree 750s as well, but not as much. They have not necessarily a perfect amount of handling or straight line performance. The 12R is faster in a straight line, the 6R is quicker through corners, but they blend a good amount of both. And that's what makes 1000cc bikes, or it's one of the things that make them so popular, because they have a great mix of both, at least when you do it right. And as far as I'm concerned, Kawasaki really did it right when it came to this one. It's fast in a straight line, it's great through corners, it's so smooth, it's effortless to ride, and although it's not the sharpest thing around, something like a 6R or a Yamaha R6 could quite easily outmaneuver it, but on the straights the power makes up for that. And again, the price is just so good that especially if you're earlier on in the game and you're looking for something bigger and more powerful to lay some cash down on, it's a good example of one to go for. It's not necessarily going to be the best thing out there, but it's a strong contender, it's a good all-rounder. This bike is just a pleasure to work with, and surprisingly there aren't all that many games that feature it, because it's a fairly obvious one to go for and to have. Of Kawasaki's range, it stands out for sure, but it's still not featured on that many riding games, mainly because of the time frame. Stuff like Tourist Trophy was a little bit before it, and newer games tend to focus, for obvious reasons, on the latest bikes, so it kind of fell into a bit of a no man's land, being around 2006. But that's it for this pick overall. It's certainly worth a look for a very low price, and of course I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.